The following was recorded during the COVID-19 pandemic through Zoom meetings in accordance with local health guidelines.
So I grew up in a Christian home, and at the age of 9, I accepted Jesus as Lord and Savior and was baptized. And as much as a 9-year-old could understand living for Jesus and faith, I tried. And sometimes throughout middle school and high school and even the beginnings of college, my actions wavered in terms of living for Jesus, like a lot of people, but my faith never did. But my faith really, I think, was solidified my sophomore year in college when I was invited to be a part of a Bible study that was going through Ephesians chapter 2. And very specifically that night, we looked at verses 8 and 9, which says that we're saved by grace through faith. And it's talked about how this is a gift of God and it's not something we can earn. And for a performance-driven person like myself, a performance-driven athlete and someone who's a performance-driven student and wanted to have those perfect grades, the light bulb finally came on. And there was like this sweet release that God accepted me, that God paved the way for me to be in right relationship with Him through Jesus. And that's really when my faith became super solid at that point.
Welcome back to the Ministry Misfits podcast. I am Andrew Fouts. Today I have with me Dan Stoffer. Dan Stoffer is he is serving in CSRM as the Director of Church Relations. He's also one of our hosts for the Tuesday Talks, as well as he is serving as our Associate Executive Director, unless you're listening to this after September of 2021. In that case, he is currently our Executive Director. So Dan, welcome to the podcast. And we're looking forward to seeing what you got to share with us today.
Thank you, Andrew. Sorry about that. I'm excited to be a part of this here today.
That's all right. Apparently I've been saying your name wrong for the whole year I've met you, so you can obviously say my name wrong here too. So we just listened to a little bit of your call or your Christian walk, your testimony there. Give us a little insight. You are not only serving with CSRM, you are also a church planner. You've been a senior pastor. You have been a sports minister. You've been all over the place. So give us a little bit of insight into who Dan Stoffer is, Dan Stoffer, the minister here.
Yeah. And you're exactly right. I've been blessed with a lot of different experiences in my 19 years of ministry, which is hard to even say that, but and that's a blessing, to experience a lot of different things. I think you covered it well. I started off in sports ministry and student ministry. I've done spiritual formation. I've been an interim pastor at a church. I've pastored 2 other churches, and then I am currently planting a church. So my first time doing that, and God has just blessed me with a lot of different experiences and leadership opportunities, and we can learn a lot, the good things and the bad things through all those different experiences. And I'm just blessed to be in the position that I'm in right now.
Awesome. So, have you actually left Ohio yet, ministry wise, or have you just been kind of hanging around here?
Yeah, you're going to hate me for saying this, but I did do ministry in Florida. I pastored a church on the east side of Tampa down there.
Came back to Ohio?
God is funny, and he has a sense of humor. To come back to snow, especially this past winter, was rough around here. But I've been in Ohio and also in Florida.
Yeah, so you grew up here where I'm currently sitting, Canton. You played high school football here. You played collegiate football here. You went to college ministry. You've done ministry here. So you've got a good connection with a lot of people that are listening to this, as well as a lot of the CSRM people all know about us here in Canton. But you started out not looking for ministry. You started out looking the typical route that most elite high school athletes look, which is I'm gonna have to find a coaching job, which means I'm gonna have to be in the schools, which means I'm gonna have to go get a teaching degree. Which, by the way, I was not surprised when you said history teacher. You look like you could definitely be a history teacher here. But give us a little bit of walk us through a little bit. You're getting ready to go to college. You're getting ready to start, your collegiate football career. Your high school, your high school career is getting close to being the end here. You're trying to figure out what's going on, and then God kind of taps you on the shoulder a little bit. So walk us through that a little bit. Let's try to get through some of these processes.
Yeah. So I was being recruited to play at some different colleges, and that was a very unique experience. A lot of it's very flattering, very humbling. I wasn't getting recruited by major D1 schools, but some 1AA at that time, D2 and D3 schools. And I remember visiting a school in Western Pennsylvania, and I went on one of those overnight trips where the other football players kind of show you around, and you have a really good time. And it just felt like God was calling me to Grove City College. And I felt like, I wanted to give back, because athletics and my schooling experience did a lot of good for me. I learned a lot about life. I learned a lot about leadership. I learned a lot about overcoming. I had a lot of great coaches who inspired me to be the very best that I could be. And so I landed there at Grove City College, and I am a fan of history, and just really felt like it's going to be being a teacher and some sort of coach. I was hoping for football, but I could coach basketball and track and baseball and stuff like that, other sports that I had played, and went through the first 3 years of college, and was doing fairly well, and started to get kind of plugged into some different campus activities when it came to Bible studies and ministries. I noticed I got injured twice, which is never fun. But my freshman year, I tore my MCL, missed about half of that season, and was really kind of bummed because I was one of the few freshman wide receivers. There was only 2 of us who made our traveling squad. And I got hurt on the last play of some blowout game. So the freshmen get in and tore my MCL. It was one of those crazy things. I'm like questioning, God, why am I here? And then, some good Christian older guys took me under their wing and just invited me to their Bible studies and stuff. And then my sophomore year, I was invited to one specific Bible study, where I understood God's grace. And that Bible study was led by one of the chaplains on our college campus. And he told me one day I would replace him as a chaplain. And I'm like, wait a minute, your dad's a pastor. You know a ton about the Bible. You seem to be very disciplined when it comes to spiritual things. Like there's no question you're walking with Jesus, and that would kind of ebb and flow for me personally, and didn't feel worthy. And I remember telling him, I don't know enough, and I don't think I'm good enough. And he said these words to me. He says, that's exactly why I think God is calling you to do this. And so that was just something that kind of sat with me for a while until right before my senior year, the summer before my senior year, I was working a summer job. And I felt that very clear call from God where I was working in a factory. It was kind of just a summer job that I typically would do when, I was off. And I felt like God was saying, it's not teaching, at least not that kind of teaching. I want you to get into ministry. I remember arguing with God, like, God, this is a problem. I only have my final year in some student teaching, and then that's it. Like, I'm too old to start over, right? I was thinking this, which is crazy now that I'm much older, thinking I was too old then, right? But then he just he brought that combination of sports and ministry together. And I had known my home church had a sports ministry, had a very small carpeted gym, but they used it. And I remembered that I had heard that Malone University back in our hometown, uh, that it had a sports ministry program. And Andrew, I know that you went through that. And then I found out that I could do that at the graduate level. I'm like, this is perfect. And so I secured a great internship at my home church in sports ministry. And they were kind of looking for somebody younger to really help get it to the next level. And I started at Malone University. I was also a graduate assistant football coach there, which taught me a ton and helped pay for school, which was fantastic. Yeah, and just from there were different experiences that were very similar, where I was tapped on the shoulder saying, "We think that you could lead our student ministry also." I'm like, I'm just starting out here, and this was a large church of over 2,000 at that time, and God just kept adding more opportunities onto my plate, and it just kind of took off.
Yeah, it's interesting because you and I have talked multiple times about the similarities in our story, but there's a couple that you just said, "Day I hadn't heard that are even it's kind of getting creepy now." Um, because I went through somewhat of a similar process of at 13, which I believe year wise actually would be about the same year that you started going through this whole thing with you and your senior year also of God saying you're going to go into ministry and just telling him no. You're funny, but no. And a long process of doing all of this stuff until it was that same summer before my senior year where I finally said okay. But it was the same sort of thing of, and this is kind of a before we break here for a minute. We'll go. This is one of the things that part of why we in the resource department here at CSRM, we're working so hard to get the Agone Institute going and getting the word out on all this stuff is that it was the same sort of thing. If I was an elite athlete there in the state of Illinois, but not in football and baseball,
Yeah,
and what am I supposed to do going into ministry when none of the schools that are talking to me have anything to do with ministry, let alone something in this line of where I'm trying to go. And it wasn't until it was the same thing. It was a meeting with Greg Linville where sports ministry suddenly showed up as an option.
yeah,
Which is why we both hold him so highly within our own personal mentorship, discipleship lives, and everything else. And it was another same. This is where it gets creepy. Was same thing. First spring practice of freshman year, I blew out my MCL,
uh, yeah,
and it was one of those where okay, why am I here then?
yep,
But those sort of circumstances are what God used to start that refining process that we'll get into a little bit more here after the break. But those of you that are kind of in this situation right now, whether you're younger or maybe even older, if you're trying to figure out what this calling you feel is, contact us. We'd love to talk it through with you. If you're
yes,
feeling I need to do something sports related, we're the place to come to, not being braggy, just being realistic. Between the Agone Institute and our credentialing programs, as well as even just some of our international missions trainings being led by PF Myers and Bradley Barnes there in Africa, you'll we will be able to help you, at least if nothing else, find where you're supposed to be going next. So Dan, hold with us. We're going to take a quick break, and then we will come back and start diving in a little bit more detail now that you've kind of found yourself situated in ministry. Try to walk through a little bit more of where you're going with this. So this episode of the Ministry Misfits podcast and this awesome shirt are brought to you by Courageous Clothing Company. Courageous Clothing Company is a Christian family-owned business that specializes in custom designs that they create, as well as bulk screen printing of your custom designs as well. When you buy from Courageous Clothing Company, you're not just buying an awesome shirt, you also are helping spread the gospel across the world through the missions that they support, such as this here with Ministry Misfits, as well as with their own designs that have Christian-themed messages sharing the gospel in an awesome and relevant way, or as we say within CSRM and Ministry Misfits, strategically relevant evangelism. Check out their entire line at courageousclothingcompany.com. So welcome back. We are still here with Dan Stoffer, and Dan is talking with us about a couple of different things here. One is kind of exploring this idea of your calling, which is a big theme throughout the whole Ministry Misfits world, I guess we can say. But then in addition to that, we're going to get into his career with church planting and how he got to that point. So Dan, when we left off, you had graduated college, you had graduated graduate school, and you were working within your home church doing sports and youth ministry. This was not something that really you had planned out. It was just God kept dragging you along, whether it was kicking and screaming or whether it was willingly. You got drug along into these positions. So take us to the next step. You're in your home church, you're doing, sports ministry, you're doing youth ministry. This is all, you're in a good spot. What happens next here? Where does God take you at this point?
Yeah. Well, one of the cool things God did is he took me into the local schools also. So not only did we have sports ministry within our church, but I was coaching football. I've coached at a couple of different schools, one in Florida, which was a startup. So that was a brand new experience. And then I coached one of our middle schools there in Canton. And that was a beautiful bridge to build to our church and out to the community. And it was a different approach to sports ministry, even though we had the programming at the church. But I could walk in as a staff member of that school and I could engage with the students. I could build those relationships. And when the time was right, and you have to be careful, right? But when the time was right, invite them or say certain things about, God and scriptures, but invite them to our youth ministry. And just a really kind of a cool bridge was built in both those cases. And, we saw people and their families, come to know Jesus as Lord and Savior. And that's what it was all about. From there, I did student ministry for about 10 years. And then when I focused more full time on whether it be student ministry and then eventually spiritual formation, and I wasn't over sports ministry in those different roles, I was always a part, either formally or informally, of a sports ministry. And so after the spiritual formation thing, the church kind of went through a difficult transition. And if you're from Canton, Ohio, you might even figure out what church that this is. I'll just say it's First Christian Church in Canton. Difficult transition from one pastor to another. And then the building of a building, maybe building too much, definitely building too much. And then the subsequent fallout in our country, the economic crisis that hit around 2009, 2010, where I found myself as the interim pastor just trying to keep this church floating and not going under. And, we were bleeding like crazy. And I did that for about, really 12 months. And
now, during that time, because, here you now have gone from 10 years before this, you were wanting to go teach history at a high school.
Yeah.
And now all of a sudden you are put into a position that you weren't ever really planning on taking in a senior pastor setting. And not only that, you're an interim pastor of a church you've been at your whole life, and you're in the hot seat because it's sinking, not due to your choices, but others' choices. And you're now having to pick up the mess. Were you ready to start looking to see if the school was needing a history teacher at this point, or what were you at thought process here?
Yeah, it's sink or swim, right? And just really leaning on God and experiences, and really athletics taught me so much. Coaching taught me so much. How to inspire people, how to cast vision, how to show people steps to get there. I mean, that's really what coaching is, right? If you've ever coached, you understand getting your players to believe in themselves, to believe in the system, the play, your game plan, and casting that vision, and then walking alongside them, helping them to course correct when they get off target. And so even having to, okay, right now, this interim church, tons of responsibility, not all of the authority of a normal senior pastor, but we need vision now. Otherwise, we're not going to make it. And of course, I cared about this church because I grew up there. And I was married in that church, all that good stuff. So it was just kind of leaning into different experiences, trusting God. I was young at that point in time, 31, 32.
You're still young. Don't worry.
I knew I liked you.
I got to keep my job somehow.
Just trying to keep this thing steady and inspire people and see, okay, what could be, not what we were going through and not even the glorious past, but what could be. And so just tried to kind of cast that vision, not quit, knowing again that there was a call upon my life, and maybe this was different than what I had ever expected. But, for such a time as this, as we read in the book of Esther. And so I just tried to cast vision, try to preach biblical sermons, just get back to the Word of God, trust the Word of God more than anything else, and just lean on those different things that God had taught me through sports ministry and through my own experiences.
And this is, that kind of brings us into a whole nother area that we can kind of dissect a little bit here, because this is one thing that hopefully, we don't really have an idea of what our full audience is yet. But ideally we're kind of shooting for this kind of an audience within, the sports ministry world, and then also just the general ministry world, or people looking, what's it about? You're talking about, you're a young pastor, you're a young interim pastor, and you're in, your home church. And so you've got a little bit of that whole prophets not welcome in their hometown scenario going on.
Yeah.
And yet here you are saying, okay, we've got to do something. We've got to make a change. And you start planning out, casting vision, praying through your vision, all this stuff. But the one thing I want to kind of pull out that you talk about is this idea of we've got to start looking forward.
Yes.
Away from this glorious past, but at the same time not leaving our past, but taking what we can out of it and applying it to the world around us. The fourfold rubric stuff of being strategically relevant but efficiently effective. And so part of the efficiently effective is going to be using some of those past things. How difficult was that for you to try to walk that line? Because I know that line of, how do I vision cast as a young pastor in a church without it looking like I'm just in here trying to make my mark? Give us a little bit of that walk, because that's something that is one of the more difficult sides of ministry in today's. This is one of those things that we've talked about, where the church culture in America has changed. This kind of dynamic is somewhat new. It used to be whatever the church's tradition was always going to be a part of what at least the vision kind of incorporated. But, since you and I have kind of started walking through this, a lot of these things have started shifting to where the traditions of the church are starting to prove that maybe they were causing some problems that we now need to address, not ignore and not get rid of, but we've got to repackage them. We've got to address them. So walk us through a little bit of that mindset.
Yeah. And I think the biggest key is just talking with people, being with people, right? To understand, no matter what your position is, we have to choose people over programs, and even people over, like you said, leaving your mark, because it really isn't about us. As much as we like to lead, right? Because we wouldn't be doing things in leadership if we didn't like it. But it's really about people. And so it's just spending time with people, earning trust, building trust. I found that in a lot of different experiences, but especially back then, because my dynamic was even more interesting, because you just said it. The prophet in his own hometown, it's just weird. And there were some people who knew me, or maybe even changed my diaper in that nursery, right? So earning trust that, hey, we can do this. You can trust me. I'm not a young kid anymore. I'm not even the kid maybe you saw make some sort of stupid mistake, though we're all capable of that. But just spending time with people. Sometimes people just need to be heard. And it doesn't mean that it should take you away from where you know God is calling you to go, because we see this in the story of the Exodus, right? The people always want to go back to Egypt. But Moses and Aaron are saying, no, it's the promised land. But sometimes it is just listening and it's talking. It's, hey, come, let's reason together about what could be. And it's not discounting the past either. Sometimes in the effort to reach the younger generations, to be more relevant, right, which is a very important and key thing in ministry, we need to not discount being a part of a multi-generational church. There's wisdom. And so I think in that environment, it was a very focused church on discipleship in a certain methodology, which was Sunday school. That church was founded on that, and then tried to make the switch into small groups. And so why can't we just do both? Why can't we grandfather these groups in, these classes into our overall process, but realize we're going to focus more, even for the sake of space in our building, we're going to focus more on groups that meet in homes, not discounting what you're doing and what you have done, and even how you minister to each other. You're pastoring each other. You're operating like a small group. But then don't discount what these people are doing, even if it looks less academic and less lecture-y, and it's more, they're sitting around a circle and sharing life together and talking. And so I think it's helping people to understand what you did wasn't necessarily wrong. There's different ways to reach people. And I have found this to be entirely true. Love is always relevant. No matter your age, love is relevant. So just love on people. Again, it doesn't mean you're not wishy-washy. It doesn't mean that you don't have to bend to complainers or things like that, but you love on them by listening to them and let them get to know you. And then you just kind of see the walls come down. And so I think I was able to do some of that and provide some healing for that church at that time. Being an interim pastor and also one of the candidates also to be the next senior pastor, there's just a lot of things that you can do to help a church move forward, whether you're the guy going forward or not. And really, that's what it's all about. And so I've been a full believer, no matter what role I played in ministry, to leave a ministry better than I found it. And I think by the grace of God, I was able to do that. And that church, from what I understand, is doing well. They pulled through some dark times. And so that was my role. I didn't necessarily know all of that back then, but that's just kind of what I did.
And that's before we leave your time there, those of you that listen to the CSRM podcast know that Dr. Linville and I have been doing some special episodes kind of talking about the future of CSRM. And this is one of those areas where Greg and I talked in the last episode that was released while we're recording this. It would have been a while ago when this actually releases. But the idea of, with our current executive director, David Waddell, that has always been his role of taking a ministry and leaving it better than he finds it, and yes, finding the next leader and getting them in the position for that, training up leaders and all that. And part of what Greg and I talked about there was the fact that when, the board hired you to be the next executive director, it was with the understanding that David was going to do that with you. But part of what Greg and I also were recognizing, and I think the board has recognized this also, is that you have a past and history of doing that as well. And that this is something that we want to, that whether you've been in ministry for a while or whether you're new to it or whether you're just trying to figure out if you're going into it or not, this concept of reproducing reproducers is critical to any church survival, whether that's talking American church in a large context or local church, or even, church that's on fire and, you're trying to put out the flames. If you are not reproducing reproducers, you're not going to see any kind of growth. You're not going to see any kind of survival. And that's one of the things that we're very excited about with you coming on within the executive director role, is the fact that that's going to continue even after David has moved into another spot. So, um, you've done your time as the interim. You have gotten the church at least on somewhat stable ground. Although I do have one other question related to this. I would love to have been in this meeting if it happened. Did you ever have to tell one of the ladies that changed your diaper as a kid that her budget has been cut?
I don't think I had to do that, thankfully.
Because that was one thing when you're talking. It's like I would love to be in that meeting just to sit and watch that whole conversation go down. But okay, now we'll leave that one alone. So you have, you obviously, you didn't get the senior pastor role. You said you were a candidate for it, did not get it. So where do you and your family go from there?
Yeah. And that was a difficult and painful process there. And when they hired their current guy, we kind of overlapped briefly. I forget for exactly how long, and it wasn't bad. I think there was a little bit of confusion, right? There were still some people that maybe were pulling for me, and I didn't get it on staff, and I just felt like, all right, I think we need to go for the sake of, okay, God had prepared me. And now I am kind of feeling called to lead a church. And I had some connections in Florida, not necessarily exactly where we landed, but through a series within my own network, I found out that there was a church that was going through similar things. And because of my experience in Canton, would really help this church on the east side of Tampa. Not the exact same thing. Their pastor had a moral failing, but the church was bleeding. The church was hurting. And so my experiences in Canton, unbeknownst to me, prepared me to help this church who was hurting again for a different reason. But again, the product is what it is. People are leaving and they're losing money and not sure how they're going to make it. But my experience there prepared me well for that church in Florida. And we were able to use some of the same experiences and stabilize that, grow that church, and get it healthy.
So you're now in Florida. We've got about 5 more minutes here, so this will definitely end up being a two-parter. You're now in Florida. You've been there for a number of years working with this church. And when does this kind of tug of it's time to start your own? When does that start up? What's the process there?
Yeah, and the process when I was in Florida, it was a wonderful church experience. The people there were just so lovely, so kind to us, and that was by definition pre-pandemic a medium-sized church. So I went from a church that historically had been over 2,000. By the time I took over as interim in Canton, it was 850, and then starting at a church of 240, 250, and that church God grew it to over 300. And we were there for about 3.5 years, and just it never felt like it was going to be long term. As much as I wanted to put down roots, it felt like it was a turnaround situation. If you've ever been a part of any ministry experience where it's a turnaround, you're probably not going to be the long-term person, just because the amount of energy it takes to get it stabilized. And it's just a very unique and specific role. And so we just kept feeling like God's going to call us back home. Well, home is Canton. He didn't call us back home to Canton. But again, through some of my own network, I heard about an opening in Columbus. And so I pastored a church in Columbus for just over 2 years, and thriving sports minister there, a thriving sports ministry. And I knew the sports minister there from my time in Canton, and he landed in Columbus as well. And it was one of our primary outreaches, especially through basketball. And just really felt like God was calling us there. And I felt like that was going to be my long-term grow old church. And I was only there for 2 years. And there was a kind of a transition after a couple of years. Didn't expect it whatsoever. And again, because of my network, I found out about an opportunity still in Columbus with a church that I had a great relationship with their senior pastor, their executive pastor. And this was, I got hired in January of 2020 before the world changed. And they had a vision, a very bold vision pre-pandemic. And this is still their vision, to plant 3 churches in 5 years. And they really felt like I could help them to accomplish. I had never planted any sort of churches. I've been around a church that did that, right there in Canton. Actually, Love Canton was a part of really a few churches, and my church, home church, was a part of that. So I got to see it, but I wasn't directly involved with it. And so it just kind of captured our hearts. And I went to the Exponential Conference with this church staff before I was on staff in Chicago, heard a lot about church planning, and just felt like God was saying, this is it. And so joined staff in January of 2020 and started meeting with a launch team pretty soon thereafter. I think pretty much the whole month of February. And I was scheduled to preach from stage, I think it was March 15th of 2020, and everything shut down. And so from there, it's like, well, we have momentum going. How are we going to plant this church?
And that ironically is a perfect place to shut down right now as well. We'll just leave everybody hanging just as you were.
Cliffhanger.
Yeah. So again, this is Dan Stoffer. He's with CSRM. He's a church planner. He wears a ton of different hats. But we are going to pick up with him next week and look at this whole idea of church planning in the midst of a pandemic, as well as finding that spot in our calling as to what it is that God's actually got planned for us, if we actually ever really do figure that out. So come back next week. Again, I don't know if we've announced this yet on here. We have finally gotten all of our audio channels working. So we are available on all major audio platforms. So go subscribing, give us the 5 stars, build us up a little bit. Share this on Facebook, all that good stuff. And we will see you next time. The Ministry Misfits podcast is a production of Overwhelming Victory Flicks, Overwhelming Victory Radio, and Ministry Misfit Media. Dr. Greg Linville and Andrew Fouts are our executive producers. Our theme music is entitled Rain and provided by Morning Light Music. For more information about Overwhelming Victory, visit overwhelmingvictory.org. For more information on CSRM, visit csrm.org. If you are interested in listening to our sister podcasts on the Overwhelming Victory Radio Network, visit overwhelmingvictory.org/OV Radio. If you're interested in contacting Ministry Misfit Media or have your own story to share, you can follow us on Facebook and Twitter at Ministry Misfit, or email us at ministrymisfitmedia@gmail.com.